Welcome to the What is Your Law Practice Worth live stream. My name is Jeremy Pook, and I'm the owner and founder of Senior Attorney Match. In today's live stream, very excited that we're going to be speaking with and interviewing 5 national leaders that will be joining us to discuss that question about what is your law practice worth. Before we begin and start introducing our guests, just want to share with the audience in terms of that question, what is your law practice worth? I want to share with the audience what we'll be showing throughout today's live stream program, which is a graphic that will show you what the value of a law practice consists of. And here you'll see that there are 4 components to valuing a law firm for determining what that worth is for a law firm: the client list, the referral source list, the goodwill of the attorney and law firm where attorneys work, of course, and the subject matter knowledge of a given attorney and a law firm. Also want to share a few other infographics that will be showing throughout the live stream today. And the first is showing how business development is changing for lawyers. You'll see here, and we're going to be discussing this with several of our guests, that we, of course, are coming out of the COVID pandemic. COVID affected so many industries in so many different ways. Law caught up in terms of lawyers and law firms expanding their virtual presence. So we're going to hear that term virtual presence today, where lawyers today that only have a website are gaining and garnering and developing less clients than the lawyers and law firms that are developing an internet marketing strategy that consists of multiple channels. We also want to share revenue scenarios for the viewers. We are geared towards lawyers that are aged 55 to 75, senior attorneys who have practiced more than 30 years. And you'll see here, we'll be talking about this with several of our guests about the benefits of joining a growing law firm in the context of the worth of a firm. What can happen in status quo when lawyers just continue doing what they did last year, really pre-2019. And then we'll talk about what happens in a Random Tuesday event. And then the last one that we'll show is that same value graphic that shows that lawyers that stay in their status quo, continue practicing without making changes, without doing the pivot that so many firms have begun doing post-COVID, run the risk of 2 of the components of their value decreasing, which are the client list and the referral source list. I'm very excited right now to introduce Peter Webb. Peter Webb is of Scorpion. Peter, great to see you. And Peter has a focus on working with lawyers throughout the country, and a particular focus on trial lawyers. And Peter, welcome. Really looking forward to your input today on the worth of law firms, value of law firms, and if you could just give us a few background origins information about yourself and Scorpion, please.
Oh, absolutely. First and foremost, thank you, Jeremy. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for putting this on. I'm also honored to speak on this panel alongside Mark, Ari, Chris, and Jan. I live for this stuff, so it's fantastic. In regards to my background, so for the past 20 years, I've been helping firms really put their best foot forward, establish strategies around their short and long-term goals, and generate an increase in the types of cases they want, right? So I've met with thousands of firms in my career. Trial attorneys are who I pretty much seem to be spending most of my time with, primarily because the stakes are so high and it requires the ability to put processes in place and typically think outside the box to go after, the types of cases that, they're looking for. And I've been lucky enough to learn from some seasoned trial attorneys, which, might have originated as clients and became friends and even a few mentors. And it's given me a unique perspective and approach to each firm I meet with, which is how I've come to be where I am today. And I love what I do.
Great. Thank you, Peter. And I know that Scorpion works with more than just trial attorneys, but Peter's being certainly very humble. Peter is a true leader on a national level when it comes to helping trial lawyers develop their internet marketing strategies. And Peter, in the context of the worth of a law firm, what's a law practice worth? Love for you to explain the acronym that you start with when you start working with new clients, which is Analyze, secure, grow, protect, ASGP. Could you walk us through that, please?
Absolutely. So let me give you a little backstory first. So I spend a considerable amount of my time evaluating circumstances, simplifying what I'm seeing, and creating strategies that fit each unique firm, right? And unfortunately, my industry is overly complicated with several acronyms, funny enough, various opinions, maybe successful historic actions that are no longer even relevant, and so on. So I created a unique process which essentially allows myself and a firm to know where they're currently at, how they measure up to other firms, what they can do about it, and how to focus on getting either better cases or expanding with firm growth. So regardless of the type of firm you have, and this is pretty important, whether you've been doing the same thing for years and years and years, and if you're, kind of doing the status quo like you just mentioned, or if you're actively seeking out new opportunities and growth, it applies to everyone, which is what all firms need, is a solid foundation with which to build upon. So diving into it, the acronym ASGP, Analyze, Secure, Grow, Protect. Okay, so let's start with analyze. So in terms of analyze, I have this as the first step because it ensures that the latest information is being taken into consideration. All too often, I speak with firms and meet with them, and they haven't recently looked into their campaign or how they're perceived, right? Or how efficient they really are, or also maybe what's not producing like it once did, right? So the initial analysis step consists of a deep dive into that firm, like finding out where a case is coming from. Exactly. What's it costing the firm, right? And what are the strengths and efficiencies overall? Right. Besides that, you also want to look into how well known you are, how effective they are at keeping in touch with, let's say, previous clients or referral sources, and what's building the brand and reputation, or conversely, what's taking away from it. So once you have all that information necessary, you move on to the next step. You've accomplished the analysis step, right? The next thing is secure. And the reason why I have this as the next one is now that you know what you have, all the raw data, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so to speak, you can do something about it to secure your position moving forward, right, in your market. So if you get most of your cases through referring prior clients, right, maybe it's time to secure a plan to grow that even bigger and build it bigger, right? Or if you notice in the analysis step that you've seen cases dipping because referring attorneys or sources are retiring or keeping them in-house, it's time to put your future, forward and look at what can be done about that, right? But that analysis really uncovers a lot of what this looks like. And funny enough, most senior trial attorneys that I've met with have stated they almost feel their position is immutable, yet the world is changing around them. But the truth is there's always options, there's always opportunities available to those that look, and probably most importantly, those that are open to change, right? Which leads to growth. So growth, how I define it, is not just expansion of offices and attorneys and things like that. I really look at it as any form of growth, which is doing more or getting more of what you want, which could include more cases or additional cases or better cases or more offices, more attorneys, or expanding into new practice areas, right? But different firms want different things, right? But all of them abide by the same laws of business, which is you need income to survive and you consistently need more of it than your total expenditure commitments, right? So to determine growth, you need to look at the overall landscape you're trying to grow into. You need to understand that landscape and that the fact that it's constantly changing. I mean, if you think about it, just think about how much the internet has changed, in terms of case acquisition in the last 2 decades alone. So to determine the correct growth plan for you and your firm, you need to look at the goals and ultimately what was uncovered in that first initial step of analysis, right? And so once you have the growth plan mapped out, right, and it's being executed, it's time to look at the final step, protect, right? You've embarked upon the strategy and get more of what you want, but you also need to focus on what you need to do to protect that growth, right? You must acquire, establish, and secure the correct partners to help you accomplish those goals. And that means the right firm, the right attorneys on board, the right marketing people, the right financial partners like Ari at Esquire Bank, for instance, because we have shared clients and things like that, having the correct intake, right? Case managers and so on. So you just have to look at all of it. But if you do that and you do that little process, you have a pretty darn good understanding of, where to go from here.
Great. Peter, thank you so much. ASGP. And the next thing I want to talk about is brand equity and brand value. You and I talk a lot about that. I mean, I just used the same word twice. Brand. I don't think that really 20, 30 years ago, lawyers were necessarily thinking about the brand of their firm and what's the value of brand. And if we can just show the components to value, because I'm curious to know your thoughts. You just walked us through on the analyze, secure, grow, protect, which you apply that to all of these is going to lead to more clients, more referral sources, all of these components to valuing a firm. And with these four components involved, and the protect piece is something important too, because you mentioned about internet marketing. I mean, that's just such a part of today's business development world for lawyers. So when you're consulting with lawyers and law firms, Peter, about how they can improve the worth of their firms, can you speak to us about brand equity and brand value?
Absolutely. So essentially, what I look at is there's two different types of components, right? So first things first, let's break down the difference between brand value and brand equity, because they sound pretty darn similar, but they have distinct differences. So brand value is, I would define it as the cumulative sum of what a brand is worth. Typically, that's actually found out usually during an acquisition process where you really dive into that. But brand equity is one of the things that's not spoken about as much. And for one particular reason, it's because it's really divided into three components and three categories that you can measure it by, which would be brand loyalty, brand visibility, and brand association. So let's think about that in a slightly different manner. So brand equity, let's say, could be established by asking these types of questions of your firm, right? How likely are people who you've helped previously to come back to you if they have a need, right? How visible are you to your past, present, and future clientele, which would be that multi-channel importance that we keep speaking about and hearing about, right? And what do people associate with your brand and firm? For example, do they understand that you could help them if you're an injury attorney? Do they understand that you could help them with any injury matter, or just if you help them with, let's say, a minor car accident case that you helped them with originally, do they only associate you with that, right? So if you think of the brand equity as the moving pieces that would really determine that, that's really what tells you kind of where you're at, right? And then you take into consideration that people's attention spans are so short today, especially when they're going online to look for answers or representation. You can't afford to just have an outdated website that kind of has some information up that hasn't been changed, because it's not giving a good impression and portrayal of who you are and why clients have valued you for years and years and years. So those are pretty important. I immediately think of one of the biggest frustrations of a lot of senior trial members and firms. And it's when I talk to them, they say, let's say they helped a family member many years ago, 5-10 years ago, right? With, let's say, I don't know, a slip and fall or med mal case. And then years later, they or someone they know, right, has a different type of accident. Let's say a catastrophic car accident or a truck accident. And the person, they end up going online, doing some due diligence and hiring whatever firm they feel that does those cases, right? But they don't hire the firm that got them the great result. And they have a good rapport, and they might even keep in touch. Well, how could that even happen? Well, it's because they didn't associate, right? Which goes back to that brand equity. They didn't associate that firm did anything other than what they helped them with in that initial factor. So in today's day and age, the better you treat your firm as a brand, right? Which is a big learning curve for a lot of firms. They think brand is Coca-Cola, Disney. It's anybody. It's how you're perceived by, your peers, your prior clients, and even future clients who may not know about you now, but they really should know about you, at some point in the near future. And so essentially you're laying the groundwork today to reap the benefits tomorrow.
Terrific. And Peter, in closing, I just want to show you one other graphic, which is revenue scenarios for attorneys aged 55 to 75. And you were referencing senior attorney trial attorneys. You and I have talked about the match made in heaven, which is when you have a growing law firm they've adopted your acronym of ASGP. They've adopted an internet marketing strategy. And just a few moments, Peter, if you could just share with us, what is that match made in heaven of taking the components of value of a senior attorney, especially the client list and the referral source list, and bringing that into a growing law firm? Why do you consider that the match made in heaven?
Well, to me, it's a no-brainer, and the reason why is it's a win-win scenario, right? Some attorneys love doing the marketing, right, and they love diving into that realm. But most trial attorneys love doing what they've done throughout their career, which is preparing and going to trial. So when a younger, hungrier firm has the marketing, the drive, the strategy, they have all of that down, and the missing piece they have is that credibility point or the goodwill or the subject matter expertise. That's what they need. That's the missing puzzle piece for them. And conversely, the senior trial attorney doesn't want to deal with all these other things of what is the latest way to get in front of your client today. So there's this symbiotic relationship between the senior trial attorney passionately doing what they love, right, and the up and coming hungry firm getting the cases, the experience, and then they get to grow their firm's goodwill, subject matter expertise. And the best part, which I am so passionate about, is whatever helps the clients get the best result and the best representation should always be the biggest measuring stick. And that's exactly what happens here. They get the best representation from the best of the best, and everyone wins. And so that's why I feel that it is a match made in heaven.
Great. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. Real pleasure to see you.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Very excited to introduce Mark Gottlieb. Mark Gottlieb is a forensic accountant and leads MSG accountants, consultants, and business valuators based in New York. Mark, welcome, and we're really looking forward to hearing your comments today on this topic of what is your law practice worth from your perspective. As a forensic accountant, you've had experience with valuing law firms over the course of your career. And if you could just share with the viewers some background information about yourself, your origin story, please. Mark, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here. Well, as you had indicated, I'm a business valuation expert and forensic accountant, and I lead a team here in New York City with credentialed valuation experts. And we are often engaged to value law firms for a variety of instances. Sometimes they're for litigation purposes, sometimes they're not. But our goal is to crunch the numbers and try to figure out what a partner's either interest in a law firm is or what the law firm totality is worth. And our job varies by case. The interesting thing, as I'm listening to Peter, if someone picked up on our broadcast today and just started listening to Peter and didn't realize that we were talking about law firms, I'm not really sure that that people would know it was for a law firm. In fact, that's why it's so significant, this conversation, because I think the trend has been, now that we're in March of 2021, that the valuation of a law practice, a professional practice, may not be so dissimilar from the valuation of other businesses. And that's really very interesting, because years past, that may not have been the perception. But I think that as a valuation expert, we look at a multitude of different issues to determine what the value of a business is worth. In its elementary stage, valuation is a prophecy of the future. And so based upon the cash flow or based upon other attributes of the law practice or the interest, we will help determine what the value of the law practice is. It's very interesting to note now that there's really two issues that I would like to just focus on when we're talking about future value, and that is cash flow and risk. In its elementary stage, those are the two main issues we have to be concerned about. What is the cash flow to the owner? Or what is the cash flow to the practitioner? What is the risk associated with generating that cash flow or income? Because the risk ties into or relates to the valuation multiple that is used to value the practice. Obviously, the more riskier the business is, the less the value that the business will be worth, meaning that the multiple will be lower. But if there is less risk and less problem in obtaining that cash flow, the multiple may in fact be higher. So those are the two basic principles that we're looking at when valuing a law firm. And as Peter had mentioned, there are other elements that are involved, and really they're not so dissimilar to other businesses, which is very, very different from what I think we had perceived some years past.
Great. So, Mark, I want to show you a graphic that we've discussed before, which are the four components to valuing a law firm. This is what Senior Attorney Match uses when we're considering valuing a law firm. And it's great that you've set this up for something that's very complicated. You've really simplified it, right? That is the cash flow and the risk of when and how that cash flow will continue for, let's say, a buyer. And here, I'd love to discuss with you your thoughts about that risk factor, because that's something I talk about a lot with attorneys that are considering the worth of their firms and who could actually purchase it. And when it comes to risk, the risk that I see and that buyers are often telling me about, Mark, is the client list and referral source list. That is, if an attorney has been practicing in a certain area, as let's say a trust and estates attorney over the course of her career, clients are coming to her because she is so knowledgeable in the given area of trust and estates for her practice. If she's not there to transition the clients and referral sources, you mentioned multiple before, I'm really seeing that it's hard to put your finger on a multiple and to put a price on, to actually provide a multiple in law because of the question over whether the clients and the referral sources will continue with the successor.
Well, you're absolutely. So let's talk about client list and referral source list, because they are distinctly different as your exhibit shows, but they are related in some respects. And before we do that, I just want to mention that my experience has been that a law firm or a practitioner who has a specific niche, whether it be estate planning or tax planning or matrimonial or personal injury, my experience has been that those practices actually are more valuable than what we'll call the general practitioner. Because what happens is that if you go back to that slide we're talking about and you see the referral list and we see the customer list, if you can generate consistent and repeated business from those two sources in a specific niche, I find that the value of the practice is enhanced by that ability. As opposed to being everything to everyone, my experience is that firms that have a specific expertise and a specific niche do better than other practices. Now, that being said, you'll notice that that many medium and even larger law firms have specialty niche practices within their large firm. And that's nothing more than the fact that they're admitting, or they are confirming my thought, that a niche practice actually has a value, has an inherent advantage. Client lists, client referrals, if you can get repeated business from those two avenues, you are much better off than, in fact, being dependent upon other avenues of marketing or advertising, because those two sources are embedded into the fabric of your practice.
Yeah, Mark, I couldn't agree with you more. And could you also share with us the concept of synergy value? That is, let's stay with this trust and estates attorney, okay, who has, let's say, 1,000 clients, and let's say she's a little bit different than most trust and estates attorneys. Let's say she's actually has kept in touch with her clients, has introduced a maintenance plan, which some trust and estates attorneys do. Why would a growing law firm, what's the value from a synergy value? If you could put a definition around that around that phrase synergy value, why would a growing firm from a synergy value standpoint really see the value in her practice?
I think experience tells all of us who are professionals that growing organically is rather difficult in today's stage. There's a lot of competition for organic growth, regardless of the sophisticated marketing that you may do or you may have. A synergistic approach to growing your law practice is a clear advantage. But what does synergy mean? Well, synergy means that you're taking two practices, whether they be the same or slightly different, and bringing them together, and they both benefit from, we'll call it nepotism. You know, will a gift from the state law firm be able to generate referrals to a matrimonial law firm, or vice versa? So there is an advantage, because when you synergistically merge more than one practice or firm together, you have efficiencies, because you may need less people to operate. You may need less office space. You may piggyback on each other on marketing. You benefit from other issues that you can do together more efficiently, more effectively, and generate more business. I don't think that it is unfamiliar to those of us who are in this area of expertise that synergy is an easier way and a more surefire way to succeed in trying to grow the business.
Great. And Mark, if you could share with us, and we've been talking a lot on the smaller firm side, and we know that in medium-sized and larger firms, there's formulas. But I'm sure the people that are watching this from the standpoint of what's the worth of their firms, and you'd mentioned multiple, I'll come out of the gate and say that often I'm telling my clients there's really not reliable multiples yet when it comes to sales of law practices. And I'm wondering that when lawyers come to you and they are asking the question, what is my law practice worth? What is the market offering? What's your answer to them in terms of how to come at a multiple approach, or what Senior Attorney Match typically doing is saying you have great value in your practice, but it's going to be paid to you as an earn-out typically?
You have me right. So that, when people ask me questions like that, and they're really asking for, Mark, what is the rule of thumb? And I generally say that a rule of thumb is somewhere between a complete guess and a non-answer. So I agree with you that I don't think there is a rule of thumb that identifies a multiple that is used on every single instance. Valuation of a law practice is a very personal exercise. It's a personal exercise for many of the reasons that you've already discussed in our program today. There is both professional and personal goodwill that may be involved. There are different firms have different assets. Different firms have different expertise. Different firms have different locales. And all these things prohibit us as professionals to really say, here is the golden rule, so to speak, that the valuation is 2, 3, 4, or 5 times earnings. That's not the way it works. I think you have to look on it on a case-by-case basis, particularly in today's market, when the legal community has the niche practice and they have strong marketing efforts. They may have a telephone number or a website, and we discussed this before, Jeremy, even a name that is worth something above and beyond the initial cash flow analysis that we may do as valuation experts. So I wish I could tell you in one quick sentence, Jeremy, the multiple is 2, 3, 4, etc. I think that would be misleading your audience, our audience, and I think that it really lends itself to having a better understanding of what the practice is all about. In fact, it goes back to the first slide we looked at that says, where are the clients coming from? Are they coming from other practices? Are they coming from other clients? Are they coming from marketing, word of mouth, etc.? All these things have to be considered. And so that may not be the perfect answer for you, but that's the best answer I can really give you at this point in time.
Mark, and I think you're right. I think it is the best answer. And at some point, when more branding comes into the legal space, I think that answer will change. Mark Gottlieb of MSG Accountants, Consultants, and Business Valuators, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to introduce attorney Ari Kornheiber. Ari is with Esquire Bank, and Ari, so great to see you. Thank you for joining us. I would do a disservice by trying to give a background and present your bio, and if you could give us an origin story from practicing attorney to where you are today with Esquire Bank, and then really looking forward to getting into the conversation with you on this topic today of what is a law practice worth?
First of all, thank you for having me on this live stream today. It's an honor to be here and an honor to be a part of this great panel, so thank you. I was a trial lawyer in New York City representing injured plaintiffs in personal injury, medical malpractice, and mass tort litigations. And I loved being on trial, but that was about 1% of my job. And the rest of it I didn't really love. And I was at a very successful personal injury mass tort law firm, but there was no partnership track for me. So after practicing for a number of years, I didn't feel like I was getting out what I was putting in. So I decided to do something a little more entrepreneurial, but still in this space. So I left the practice of law and I helped start Esquire Bank over 15 years ago. And very briefly, Esquire Bank is a national commercial bank that services all types of law firms on a national platform. We have a special affinity towards contingency fee law firms because those law firms are really underserved and underserviced by traditional banks, which is why you see a lot of litigation funding companies out there now offering financing to those contingency fee law firms. We're also a publicly traded company on the NASDAQ as of June of 2017. And that infusion of capital has really allowed us to invest in technology and talent and grow Esquire Bank, again, on a national platform, one law firm at a time. But we take great pride in really trying to understand the business of law. So that's kind of who I am and who Esquire Bank is.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. I mean, so many lawyers, their complaint about their bank is that their bank just doesn't understand what they do as law firms, and particularly as you point out, contingency fee based law firms. So Ari, could you share with us some of the key factors that Esquire Bank considers when considering lending to law firms?
Absolutely, and I think it's so relevant to today's conversation because whether a law firm is looking for financing to run their business, grow their business, finance case costs, or a possible acquisition of another law firm, it's sort of the creditworthiness of that underlying business. And that's where we have a unique skill set. So like Mark was just discussing, you really have to look forward because traditional banks really only look backwards. When they're looking to potentially provide financing to a law firm, they would say to the law firm, show me your last 3 years tax returns and we'll tell you how much we could potentially lend to you. And that's where the frustration starts because the law firms may say, I'm happy to do that, but I also want to share with you what I'm going to be doing over the next 12, 24, and 36 months because it's going to look very different. I have a more diverse practice. I have more larger cases that are going to generate more fees. And the traditional banks get this glazed look on their face at that point because, again, especially for contingency fee attorneys, by very definition, those cases could be worth 0 or X. So how can a bank lend against an asset class that by its very definition could be worth 0? However, we look at it very differently. Quality contingency fee law firms work on quality cases and they generate revenue on those cases well over 90, 95% of the time. So starting there, understanding that, we look at the case inventory first and foremost. As a bank, we also have to look back and understand the financial history. It's more regulatory, know your customer, and it also provides some pretty good indicators about what's going to happen forward. But we look at the projected fees in the current case inventory, We also separate the case costs from the projected fees. Projected fees are going to generate future revenue. Case costs get paid out of the client's share of the settlement. So it's a little, semantics there, but by separating the fees and the case costs, it allows us to actually lend more to the underlying law firm. It's a pretty big differentiator there. Not only that, when we see that a law firm, the source of their business may be through, marketing and advertising, and if the cases turn over in, let's say, 18 months, if the law firm is going to continue that type of case acquisition strategy, then the cases in their current docket will settle in the next 18 months. If we're going to look forward 3 years, we could actually double those numbers, even if the cases aren't signed up yet, and lend against future cases that aren't even in the law firm's inventory yet. So it's a pretty progressive way of looking at this.
Great. Ari, I want to share with you a graphic, which just shows how the landscape in terms of how law firms are, for lack of a better word, acquiring clients today. It's a battleground on the internet. And just curious to hear your thoughts on how Esquire Bank views lending to firms and what we can call their virtual presence. Okay. I mean, yesteryear it was go to networking in-person meetings and lead CLEs, write papers, be published. Today, as you can see here with this graphic, it's a website, Google, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all of this. And how does Esquire Bank view the return on investment, loan to value? I mean, these kinds of banking terms when clients are coming to you and saying, look, Ari, we think we need to pump in a 5-6 figure amount to improve our virtual presence. What's Esquire Bank's viewpoint towards firms that are thinking improving their wealth by investing in their virtual presence?
We love when law firms use our capital to invest in their virtual presence. Okay, let's start from the fact that if we're providing a law firm with financing, again, we're using their current inventory and future inventory as the collateral for our financing. If they are going to be using our capital for case acquisition, that right there provides us with more collateral, which allows us to provide additional financing. So it becomes this great symbiotic relationship with this cumulative effect. We take it very seriously. It's one of the factors we look at each and every time. How are you generating new business? And when we see a law firm that relies on just their website and word of mouth referrals from their clients, we know that that law firm is not going to grow the way others are, some of the younger attorneys who have really embraced the technology. And in contrast, when we see, and yesterday I was speaking to a law firm in the Midwest, and sure enough, I have the website up and I reviewed it ahead of the meeting. In the bottom right-hand corner, I saw the scorpion. And I knew that this law firm invested in their brand and they had a digital marketing strategy that I was excited to speak to them about, because that right there is a great indicator that they're trying to run their law firm like a business, that they're embracing the technology that's available. And then, 180 degrees in the other direction, there's an attorney who told me a story recently that he was reliant on one law firm for 95% of his business. And then one day that law firm showed up and said, sorry, I can't refer you any more business. And basically said that he felt like his business just burnt to the ground. And he had to come up and scramble to find a way to generate new business. So again, those law firms that have this diversified marketing strategy that invests in its brand, that gives back to the community, it's really important for us when we're trying to determine that loan to value. How much could we lend that law firm?
Great. And Ari, in our last few minutes, can you speak to us about growing law firms when they're thinking about growth by acquisition, right? We just talked about the lending on investing in your virtual presence. But to those growing firms that look at senior attorneys and see that senior attorneys have clients and referral sources, banks may not be able to put up the actual money to provide a purchase price, but there are costs involved with acquiring a firm, of transitioning clients and referral sources, investing in the website, other acquisition related costs, or heck, even acquisition costs altogether. What is Esquire Bank's view towards a growing firm that wants to grow by acquiring a senior attorney's firm?
it's something that we actually have experience in, and we're seeing more and more of it, I think, just because of demographics and the like. Whether it's a firm that's looking to sell itself or an acquisition like you're discussing, it's, again, this unique perspective. What is the value of the combined entities? So first we start with the entities side by side, doing an evaluation of the two, and then combined. We know that often there are some great efficiencies that are the result of that merger or acquisition, and that leads to a reduction in some of the expenses that are projected. We then look at, again, the projected fees over the next 12, 24, 36 months, and there are, various opportunities for younger law firms looking to acquire a senior firm to put the two together and get access to capital that I don't think years ago even existed, but it certainly does today.
And just so that the viewers that are joining us that are in medium and larger sized firms, Esquire Bank, does it also have the ability to lend on internal partner buyout situations?
Yes, we've done it. When there are, partner buy-ins and things like that, we also have to start looking at the partner's personal financial statement, tax returns, and things of that nature. It's often a pretty easy transaction because, again, they're going to be buying into a situation, obtaining equity in a successful firm, generally speaking. So whatever their personal financials look like today, they generally can be projected to be stronger post the buy-in. So we're happy to provide that type of financing.
Well, great. Ari Kornheiber from Esquire Bank. Ari, always a pleasure to see you. Esquire just gets it when it comes to lending to law firms, and you as an attorney, the mindset of attorneys, what they're going through day in and day out, and really hope that people will reach out to you, Ari, when they have lending needs for their law firms. Thanks so much for joining.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I'm very excited to introduce Chris Cahill. Chris Cahill is with 12 Points Wealth Management, and Chris is an attorney and now focuses on wealth management with a particular focus on lawyers. So in the context of today's program, where we're discussing what is your law practice worth, Chris is going to join us today and really offer some tremendous insights on how lawyers can save, how they can make the most of the worth of their firms, because at some point, lawyers will want to retire. And when they retire, they do want to be able to monetize this tremendous asset and this great investment that they've had throughout their careers. So, Chris, a lot of pressure on you today, and love to hear first the story about you and your background, please.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again for having me on your live stream here with this wonderful panel. So my background, as you described, I'm very much like Ari. I'm a recovering attorney. I practiced law for a number of years in the Boston area. Did not love it either, and ended up transitioning out of the world of the day-to-day practice of law into financial planning. And I've been fortunate enough over the last 20 years to transition my practice into working primarily with partners at major law firms and law firms themselves. So we run 401ks, retirement plans, defined benefit plans here at 12 Points. And my practice is centered purely around working with partners at law firms. So real big focus on financial planning, helping people understand what their goals are, what their objectives are, and helping them develop a plan as to how to meet those goals and objectives. And that's a quick overview as to myself and 12 Points.
Terrific. So, Chris, during the course of our interview today, we're going to talk through a case study. And before you introduce the case study, want to share with the viewers a particular graphic that shows, the trajectory of revenues for attorneys ages 55 to 75. Chris, often I'm saying to senior attorneys that I'm meeting with that attorneys in their 50s and into their 60s are similar to star athletes in their 20s and 30s because they've got great subject matter knowledge. And you can see here the 4 components to value: great subject matter knowledge. They've developed great goodwill in their communities, their state, sometimes regionally and nationally. developed a client list and a great referral source list. Here's the but, Chris, is that at some point, and we demarcated here age 65, at some point, because of maintaining the status quo, revenues tend to go down.
Yep.
A new client coming in wants to work with an attorney for 5 to 10 plus years. Referral sources start to retire. And then, God forbid, there could be a situation where a lawyer could have a mental or physical ailment that can cause them no longer to be able to practice, and the value just absolutely plummets. So we just wanted to show this. We're going to come back to this slide towards the end after you share the case study with us. But love to hear and have you show us our attorney Turner and the case study you've prepared for us, please.
Absolutely, thank you. So attorney Turner that we're going to be talking about here is a 67-year-old attorney, operates his firm with 2 associates and 3 support staff. His practice is centered around business law, real estate, and trust and estate. He personally makes about $400,000 a year, billing out at $350 an hour. And his associates bill out at $300 an hour, and each bill $300,000 a year themselves. So the total revenue for the firm comes in at around $1 million. The overhead is about $600, so the net profit's around $4. This is pretty traditional for a small firm. We see this quite a bit. He doesn't take too many days off, as you can imagine, as we all know. The longest vacation in the last 30 years was 2 weeks. And, really refers out a lot of work because there's stuff that they don't have in-house expertise on. And in many instances, that's not coming back with a referral fee. So the fact pattern is outlined here is one that we see quite frequently, and Bill is at a precarious point in his life, to be honest. Things can go one way or another, and with proper planning, hopefully well in advance of 67, to be honest, he would be in a position to move forward correctly. So let's move to the next slide here. So as it relates to his assets, we're going to just assume that he has retirement assets of about 1.2 million, taxable accounts of around 300, that it's a moderate portfolio of 60-40 stocks to bonds, pretty traditional stuff, to be honest. Basic living expenses of around $105,000 a year, make some gifts to family members, cover some healthcare costs, some travel, and some philanthropic inclinations. So total out of pocket for the family is about $150,000 a year. So in total, when you look at what that personal nut is that he needs to have accumulated by the time he's desiring to retire at age 72, there needs to be about 2.8 million of assets, and he's not there yet, as you can see. So we look at situations like this from a perspective very simply as to where are we going? So really cash flow focused and cash planning forecasting is really critical to be able to help guide Bill and his wife through these important decisions.
Great. And so now we've got 2 scenarios that you're going to go over. One that graphic we were showing before and status quo, and then another one that will show what happens when an attorney such as Attorney Turner joins a growing law firm. So why don't we first look at the one that shows our forecast, your forecast for an attorney who has lowering revenues as time goes by.
Certainly. So on your slide that you showed a moment ago, there were 3 options. This is the medium case, what we call the status quo. We do see this quite a bit, and we call it here depreciating value. So for purposes of the modeling that we prepared, and the graphic in the top right of this slide that shows 77% probability of success, that's probability of success of meeting all of the family objectives, those things that we just discussed a moment ago, the living expenses, et cetera, presuming retirement at age 72, so on and so forth. So 77% is an all right probability of success. It doesn't make me feel really comfortable. I'd want it to be high 80s, personally, low 90s. But what we see here is the depiction of reducing income. So reducing income results in reduced savings capacity. So as a result, he's not really putting enough money aside for the eventual retirement under this model here to arc him into the 90s on a probability of success. So this, unfortunately, we see quite frequently with folks that are at a point in their career where they just haven't thought through the succession plan appropriately and haven't figured out an internal successor or that senior attorney match external program that is so important that you excel in, Jeremy. So what we see, unfortunately, is somebody that's really neglected to plan for themselves, and either through just the nature of business changing, or as you indicated a moment ago, their referral sources drying up, or just simply changing horses. It's really important to understand that that we see what's going on here, and what we really see is depreciating value for the family. So this is something that we really want to minimize and prevent.
Great. And then the contrast is the join the growing law firm.
Exactly. So let's take a look at that slide. So this makes me feel a lot more comfortable, as you can imagine. Again, top right slide of the slide here, the 95% probability of success. This means to me that Bill and his wife are going to have a much more comfortable and stable and successful retirement than they would have under the other scenario. And why is that? Well, based upon the hypothetical that we've generated here for this model, Bill's moved his practice to a growing firm, and as a result, he's not only kept his billables up, he's actually been able to increase that revenue stream because he's able to now make referrals internally and get credit for that. So his compensation is bumped up a little bit from the 400 that we saw initially. But the beauty of this scenario from Bill's perspective, and I would imagine his wife's as well, is that, you see, he only works for 3 years. He then retires, but captures a payout from the practice based upon the agreement that's negotiated for the next 5 years of $1 million. So that tail, if you will, on the payout for him really is important, because his income remains high for the first 3 years, but then the compensation tail over the next 5 years really helps cover that living expense number that we've discussed, and keeps the other assets able to grow. Really important to continue the tax deferred growth in the IRA and allow the assets to continue to compound. So this scenario here is markedly better for Bill and the family. It removes a tremendous amount of risk that could have been hidden in the status quo, not to mention at all the Random Tuesday event that you showed on the last slide, where the 77% probability could drop dramatically if Bill could no longer continue to work, either due to a mental incapacity or physical incapacity in one way, shape, or form.
Well, great, Chris, thank you. And let's bring it back in terms of coming full circle and look back at those revenue scenarios, because those slides so helpful. The scenarios that you played out with Bill Turner were really great. And in the real world, when we call up that slide for those revenue scenarios, in the real world, this is what I'm seeing and what you're seeing. Right. I mean, it may come off a bit academic, but literally, I am talking with senior attorneys very often that are working 6 to 7 hour days. So that'd be nice. 6 to 7 days per week.
Right.
And often 10-hour plus days, and still their revenues are going down. And the reason why, at least when they're maintaining that status quo, and the reason why is because the same clients and referral sources, looking at those 4 components to value, they are actually depreciating in value over time. And to pick up on your point of the senior attorney that's actually able to retire at age 70 and join growing law firm, those revenues go up. Why is that? It's because they're joining a firm where there are younger attorneys that are capable and ready to continue the client and referral source relationships. So it happens. And it's great that you point that out in the slide, but in the real world, it happens where, I have clients that, we're here in the Northeast, Chris, and I have clients that spent the winter this winter in Florida, fielding calls on their cell phones, and then referring clients to lawyers back in the Northeast for that they joined, and they're benefiting by that into their retirement years. So Chris, want to thank you very much for joining. And if you could just share, maybe we'll call up that slide one more time, Chris, before we let you go. That revenue, that revenue scenario slide, because from the planning standpoint, if you could meet with an attorney who's in that 55 to 65 range, okay, before that fork in the road is hit, if you could just share one or two nuggets of advice for attorneys such as those.
Sure. So that's really a critical time period for these attorneys. To your description from earlier, they're at the top of their game, and they really need to plan at that point, as opposed to waiting till age 65. Truly, very few do, but it's really important that they do. So the things that I would suggest is making sure that they have a plan in place to effectively save and invest for retirement, develop a risk mitigation strategy to prevent loss of income, or heaven forbid something were to happen to them in the form of a premature death. Those things are all basic blocking and tackling. But one of the most important things right now is we're staring down the barrel of a potential dramatic increase in income taxation. And for attorneys that make good income right now and are desiring to have a successful retirement, looking through the tools available to them as far as retirement planning, whether it's maximizing their 401k profit sharing, but more importantly, these renewed focus on cash balance retirement plans, pension plans, is really, really critical. So the ability to save more and provide more certainty in retirement is really, really important today more than ever in light of potential changes in tax laws. That's what I would say.
Terrific. Well, Chris Cahill, 12 Points Wealth Management, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Jeremy.
I'm very excited to introduce Jan Lebowitz. Jan leads Legal Ethics Advisor. Jan is an attorney, has litigation background, has been a professor, and now leads Legal Ethics Advisor. I think the viewers may be thinking to themselves, all right, wait a second. This is a program about what is your law practice worth? Why is Jan here and talking about legal ethics? And I think people will see and learn soon enough why, as lawyers are thinking about the worth of their firms, expanding the value of their firms, that we do have professional rules of conduct. We've talked about brand, and Jan's going to speak with us about building brand firms that are going beyond their home states and becoming regional and national in scope, and what they should be thinking about from an ethics standpoint. And then most lawyers by now know that there are some very interesting changes going on in the legal world in the United States when it comes to changes in Arizona and Utah and what's happened in Washington, D.C. About non-lawyer ownership in law firms. I imagine some jaws are already dropping. Mine did when I first heard about this, that it's actually is being experimented upon. So before we delve into those questions that I'll be asking you, Jan, could you please share with us your origin story and your role at Legal Ethics Advisor? Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thanks for having me with such an esteemed panel. It's, I guess, not true that lawyers can't do math, because some of them are doing it quite well. At any rate, my background's very eclectic, as you sort of mentioned. I've started as a legal aid attorney. I practiced law for 20 years. I worked at the Justice Department in the Nazi hunting unit. I was a commercial litigator doing business cases. I was in-house, so many different things. I spent over 13 years running an ethics program at University of Miami Law School and teaching other courses as well. And through that time, I became a legal ethics expert and started consulting. And interesting for me is people have just through the years found me organically, but in the past year, I've launched a website and I'm out there full-time consulting and doing risk assessment and testifying in cases, etc. So that's as nutshell as I can get it.
Oh, great. Jan, thank you. I want to share with you a slide, which is business development for law firms in 2021. Of course, we're coming out of the COVID pandemic. And, one of the phrases that really struck me in 2020 was when someone commented that we're much closer to 2030 than we are to 2019. Okay, in terms of that word pivot is so used in 2020, but the pivot towards everything virtual and the expansion of the convenience economy that people just want and need things at their fingertips all the time, searching for an attorney, going straight to Google. And I want to share this with you because so many law firms today are really developing themselves and branding themselves, developing a brand equity. And they are advertising in all these different channels that you see on the right-hand side of this graphic. And if you could share with us, as law firms are building brand beyond the borders of their home states, so few pieces of advice that you could offer that firms should be cognizant of when it comes to the advertising rules. In the model rules of professional conduct, probably better to stay there than be state specific.
Well, absolutely. And just as sort of a footnote to everything you just said, the legal profession has not been known to embrace technology. We're generally not in the forefront of any of it, including back to when the telephone was invented. So what's remarkable about what you've said, which is quite true, is that the pandemic forced law firms to find other ways to embrace technology. And along with that, they found their way much more often onto social media and onto branding opportunities. The problem with staying with the model rules is what we can glean from the model rules, which were amended a few years ago on advertising, is fundamentally that you need to be not misrepresenting, of course not lying, being honest with the public, and not soliciting clients in any kind of overbearing, impermissible way. But I can't, as someone, I've done a lot of work in advertising, as you know, Jeremy. You really need to check your state rules, because sitting here in Florida, they are extremely detailed, and some would say overly conservative. Whereas if you're in California, the lawyers are a lot less concerned. So when you're going to brand, and if you're going to be cross-border, you need to consider all the states that you're going to visit, and they're changing all the time, because Florida's thinking about revising theirs, simplifying theirs. Texas just passed new advertising regulations. So I'm not in any way saying to avoid social media. I teach social media in the law. I've written a book on it, but you need to know what the rules are.
Great. And so, Jan, can we pivot, right? That word, maybe that word will leave the lexicon at some point, to Rule 5.4, okay,
Sure.
Of non-lawyer ownership in law firms. And if you could just educate us about what's happening in Arizona, the sandbox in Utah, and your thoughts about whether this is just, I was thinking before our interview about some law school phrases, is this a slippery slope? Okay. Is this, reasonable? And then non-law school phrase of, can we unring a bell? So if you could just educate us what it is, and where do you see this going?
So you mentioned Washington, D.C., and they have permitted, you said 5.4. So for people who aren't ethics nerds like myself, or informed like you, that's the professional independence of a lawyer rule. And that is the rule that prohibits lawyers from being in business with non-lawyers, dividing fees with non-lawyers, the idea being we're protecting the public. Lawyers shouldn't be influenced by the others, let's say. So DC's had the rule for many years. People were not all that aware of it because it's only in DC, and DC lawyers would tell you the sky's not falling. There you can have a non-lawyer partner or a non-lawyer participant in the firm who has a financial interest, as long as they're participating in the firm. They don't permit passive investors. So what's happening now, and it was happening before the pandemic, and I think the pandemic has sped everything up. There are task forces all over the country in many states or committees, including in Florida where I sit, where they're looking at maybe it's okay to have non-lawyers involved in your firm. Maybe it's okay for lawyers to collaborate with tech companies to increase access to legal services. What happened in Arizona is they just did away with that rule. As opposed to modifying it, they deleted it, straight up deleted it, which was like, oh my God. Everybody wondering what's going to happen. And it's pretty recent. What's happening in Utah is they set up what they're calling the sandbox, the regulatory sandbox, where firms and non-legal or non-lawyer owned firms can register to do business together. And where everyone's looking to Utah to collect data. In this way, no one gets in trouble for violating the rules. They're protected. It's a safe haven. And we can see what happens. All of it's really new. I receive calls from lawyers who want to get in on the action, so to speak, in Arizona, and they really can't under the Florida bar rules. But the Florida committee that's looking at this is thinking about maybe it's okay. Maybe we can be members in firms with non-lawyers. The closest Florida's come is it has said that non-lawyers can share fees with a lawyer in a firm, for example, in DC, even though that firm has non-lawyer membership in it. So, I mean, I'm really getting in the weeds here, Jeremy, so pull me back. And
no, it's fine. I think that, Jan, as you probably know, I mean, this is barstool talk, okay, among lawyers. I mean, I speak with lawyers across the country, and they continuously ask for and are expecting that this could happen within a generation, if not sooner. And they look to the United Kingdom, and other places outside the United States, where, as you're saying, the world has not fallen in on itself. Clients are still being advocated for properly, and it would be a total game changer in terms of how money could come in to law firms, make sure clients are protected. But in terms of building that worth of a firm, I'm not saying that firms should be waiting for tomorrow to have private equity groups come in and buy law firms. But these are very interesting changes that are happening.
Absolutely. And what's being resisted to the greatest degree is private equity firms buying law firms and the big four accounting firms taking over the practice of law. And by the way, you mentioned the UK, and it's true, it's going on in the UK, but they started from a different premise where they had already defined activities for lawyers and non-lawyers, whereas we self-regulate here on a state-by-state basis. And so the tension is the fear of giving up the revenue that lawyers are making. Between that and let's get with the program, it's the 21st century. If everyone gets in this together and we collaborate, especially with a lot of the tech companies that can make services available to a broader section of society, maybe there's more money to be made for all. So it remains to be seen.
Well, Jan, thank you so much for joining us. And I'll just share with you, my paternal grandmother had this great saying of, it's very easy to get into trouble and very hard to get out of it. And when it comes to legal ethics, as firms are investing much more in that virtual presence that we've talked about during today's program, they would be well advised to contact you or other legal ethics advisors to make sure they're within the boundaries of the legal ethics rules, not only in their state, but in the states that they're expanding to. So, Jan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to welcome back all of the guests to today's program on the question of what is your law practice worth? And now we're going to go into a Q&A session. So welcome back, everyone. I'm going to share on the screen the question for each of you. Each of you have a couple of minutes, and really interested to hear your perspectives as viewers here are owners of law firms, partners in law firms, growing law firms, senior attorneys. What two pieces of advice do you suggest for law firms to improve their worth in 2021? And we'll start with Peter Webb of Scorpion. Please, Peter.
Okay, first of all, thank you so much. And Jan, I just have to say real quick, it's so funny how many things, you don't even have to be a legal ethics nerd, because I've studied all the bar regulations for advertising for every single state. And so I know full well how different it ranges. And funny enough, I look at every one of those things when someone comes to me. And so the concept of don't lie, don't misrepresent yourself couldn't be truer. So it's not just in your niche, it actually is relevant to all of us. So I just wanted to say that there's so many correlations here with all the fantastic panelists that we have. So, but Jeremy, going back to your question, what I would probably say is I think your 4 components to valuing a law firm, really, instead of just 2 things, I would say, to use my acronym, the analysis component, secure, grow, and protect, really applies to those 4 things, which are, in terms of your client list, your referral source list, right? And then in terms of the goodwill and then the subject matter expertise or knowledge that you have. So what I would say is, first step, look at the analysis component, right? Look at the client list, both historically and current, right? We heard from Mark, we heard from Ari, Chris, you mentioned it as well, in terms of what does the historic data look like, but also what's the future look like with that. So getting a fresh understanding of what that looks like, as well as with the referral sources, where are they coming in? Are you relying on one entity, like Ari talked about, 95% of his practice, and then the next day is kaput? That's not really a strong position to be in. So getting a fresh understanding of what that looks like, and then focusing on building the goodwill, right? Do what's right by your clients and make sure that you're promulgating those strengths through the correct channels, and make sure you have the correct partners. And a byproduct of doing that, you become a subject matter expert, or at least the quotient of it is established. So for me, at least, I would say paying attention to those components. Once you do an analysis, then you can secure those strengths that you have, but also be aware of the weaknesses. Then you can focus on how to grow those strengths, whatever that looks like for you, and then protect those. So that way, as you might be, meeting with Chris, for instance, at the latter part of your career and determining what makes the most sense, you have such a solid understanding of what makes sense for you. And that brings security and confidence because you have a solid foundation. So that's probably what my advice would be.
Terrific. So Ari, question to you. What 2 pieces of advice do you suggest for law firms to improve their worth in 2021?
Number 1, become educated on some of the emerging legal technology that is now available. It is amazing how more efficient you could practice law by embracing that new technology, whether it's your case management system, your intake system. You need to have visibility into your attorney's performance so you can make great business decisions going forward. It's about data and intelligence, and the technology that's available will provide you that type of visibility. We've seen it in banking. Esquire Bank has embraced banking technology. And when we see a law firm that's embraced legal technology, combined, it's really, 1 + 1 = 5. So I strongly recommend that. Number 2, I'm going to call it financial planning. Look forward 3 years and come up with projections on your law firm's revenue. And this should be reviewed at a minimum quarterly. Force your attorneys to put projections on your work in progress in terms of value, and timing. And, estimates are better than nothing. Maybe it's a high, low, or something. Again, we just came through PPP round 2, which has been extended, and we were a provider of that. And what a great short-term financial solution, but you also have to play the long game. Look forward. And I like to, have our own PPP. It's planning, be prepared, and be proactive. Too many law firms are just reactive, and their financial planning is the next big case that they're hoping to resolve. So, I guess 2B would also be to think about financing your disbursements if you're a contingency fee attorney. Jan can tell you that most states allow trial lawyers, if there's disclosure language in their retainer agreements, to finance their disbursements, and then they have the option to treat the interest as a case cost itself. It will come out of the client's share of the settlement, or they could just pay it themselves. It's certainly better than the phantom income that many self-financed law firms are dealing with on an annual basis. So legal technology and financial planning, I think, would really, if you invest in those areas, whether you're looking to acquire another law firm or sell your law firm or merge, they'll put you in the best position to succeed.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. Okay, Mark Gottlieb, question to you, please.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that there were a lot of golden nuggets in the past hour and change from each of the presenters. It was really terrific, and I learned a tremendous amount. But to answer your question specifically, I really have, I think, almost 3 things. The first one is I actually agree with Ari that the first thing you should do is make sure that you have an appropriate case management system and an accounting system that will enable you to not only operate proficiently in your practice, but also to a lot of what Peter had said, to create a brand for your practice. That's very, very important. And you shouldn't make a distinction between the two. There's a lot of software that's available. I'm not talking about, a check writing software. I'm talking about other software that's available to professionals that should be used. That being said, I just want to pick up on something that Chris had said. I really related to Chris's presentation because I always say that if you're not making 30 to 40% as a single practitioner attorney or small member of a small firm that has $1 million to $1.5 million of business, if you're not making 30 to 40% to the bottom line, there's something wrong. That should be your goalpost. And if you're not making that amount, you need to go back and figure out exactly what's preventing you from achieving those goals. The next and last thing I just want to say, and I don't mean to be redundant to what I had spoken for during my session, is that I think that the best thing for an attorney that's in our sphere right now here that we're talking about is to develop an expertise, a niche in a specific or maybe a few specific areas of law. Not only will that allow you to generate better clients, more consistent clients, but here's the secret, guys. It will allow you to charge more for your time if, in fact, you charge by the hour. Okay, so those are my points. It kind of piggybacked on some of the things that you guys were saying. And, I hope I didn't steal anybody's thunder, but I learned so much about what each and every one of my colleagues here had said, even though I'm the only non-attorney in the room. Okay, but it was really, really terrific, and I appreciate the opportunity to help you here.
Well, you just made Peter Webb feel very good because, Peter, I think you know enough about personal injury law practice that that you may not have a JD as initials yet, but you're very close.
Honorary.
Great. All right. So, Chris Cahill, on to you. 2 pieces of advice that you suggest for law firms to improve their worth in 2021.
Thank you, Jeremy. I would modify that question slightly to fit my own purposes better, which I think is very simply how to maximize the personal worth of the attorneys. I think that's the real importance here, because absent that, the value of the practice for the smaller firms that we're talking about here is really dependent upon the success of the individual partners. So planning for each of them individually is critical. Do you have enough saved? Are you saving appropriately? Are you saving in the right vehicles? And then from there, really paying attention to corporate vehicles to save and defer appropriately. The cash balance retirement plan is such a wonderful vehicle for lawyers, one that's underutilized. It will be back in force in the near future. We're implementing many of them here at our firm, and I can't speak highly enough of trying to find ways with a team of professionals like this to defer income taxes and improve the probability of success into retirement. So it's all centered around planning and execution from my perspective, Jeremy.
Terrific. Thank you. And Jan, please, your suggestions.
Last but not least here, my first suggestion is overlaps with some of the others, but it is embrace technology and innovation. And by technology, I mean anything from innovating in how you run your law firm, the process, case management, the billing software, to marketing, because there's a lot of technology available, and go for it. And if you don't understand it, get somebody who understands it to help you. Then the second part, and I might throw a third one in too, Jeremy. Everyone's taking liberty with your questions. The second one is risk assessment. We haven't really talked about that, but especially for smaller firms, get some risk assessment. It's not, we go to checkups yearly, we hope, for our doctor or our dentist. Have someone look at your retainer letters. Have someone look at your marketing, unless you're using Peter, I guess, who checks the rules. Do some risk assessment. It's always better also to ask for permission than forgiveness, or at least to make the business decision that you're going to ask for forgiveness. At least know what you're doing. And the last one I'd throw in is kind of a soft one, but I think it's important. With the various generations in law firms now, which is reflect upon the culture of your firm. The baby boomers and the millennials are a whole lot closer now in what they want than they were before the pandemic, because now the boomers can see, no, maybe someone can work remotely and they actually do the work and it's actually fine. And maybe the millennials now appreciate, it's kind of nice to have an in-person meeting or be able to walk down the hall. And this is true for any size firm, really, when there's more than one of you. So those would be my three.
Great. Thank you to all of you. I'll chime in as well, and I'll also twist the question and expand it to three. So I want to show again to the viewers the slide about the revenue scenarios for senior attorneys. And here I'm going to borrow from Ari Kornheiber, because Ari, I think you just said it great about those, the Ari Kornheiber triple P, okay, which is plan, prepare, and be proactive. And Ari, I think you just nailed it when you said that, because when looking at this graphic in terms of the worth of a law firm, lawyers have the benefit, and senior attorneys in particular have the benefit of developing this value over the course of their careers. And particularly, we hear so often among lawyers, what's the size of the book? I mean, an attorney who's done business development over the course of his or her career, they've developed clients and referral sources, subject matter, goodwill. From the planning and preparing standpoint, if a lawyer is going to take advantage of that value, they should really consider preparing for, do they want to continue with their status quo, join a growing law firm, or otherwise really plan for how they can monetize their law practice when they're thinking about retirement. Because if they're not proactive, you can see what happens in terms of the value going down. So I want to thank everybody today for joining this great panel, for everybody's insights, and so fortunate that all of you joined us, and really appreciate all of your time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Be well, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.